Hey guys, today we're going to be introducing some different genres of writing, and we're going to look at some graphic organizers that will help break down each type of writing that we're going to be discussing, not just this week or next week, but pretty much throughout the whole school year. And so we're going to introduce them all at once and get some foundational knowledge and skills, and then as we revisit them, you'll become more and more familiar. One thing I want you to think about as we're looking at these is the types of reading that you're doing right now in your reading class, or in your own personal books that you're reading. And so I want you to be thinking about that as we go through them, because you're going to recognize some things from either the books and the stories that you're reading, or even sometimes the television shows or movies that you're watching. So today our learning objective is that by the end of this video, you should be able to identify characteristics of 3 different graphic organizers, which are the narrative diamond, the informational pillar, and the argumentative pillar. So let's get started with narrative writing. In a narrative, the purpose is solely to entertain an audience. And there are actually 2 different types of narratives that we're going to get into later. But mainly all narratives have some similar characteristics. They usually have a main character, whether that is the person who's telling the story, like in a first-person point of view, or a narrator who's telling the story about characters. There is a main character, a protagonist that we're following. A narrative typically follows a plot, including a setting, rising action, a conflict or story problem, and a resolution. And I know in your reading lessons, you're going to be talking about this, so this should seem familiar. So the way we're going to talk about narrative writing from an author's perspective, and as writers, you're all authors, so I need you to start reading with an author's eye. We're going to think about it like a diamond, where in the beginning, we have an entertaining beginning, and that could be a story that starts off with a piece of action, like in mid-battle. It could be a piece of dialogue where a character is talking or 2 characters are talking. It could even be just the character's thoughts and feelings about how that they're having in that very moment. It could be a description of a scene. It could be a question. It could even be a sound device like onomatopoeia, or figurative language like a metaphor or simile. Then we're going to move into that elaborative detail. This is actually where we're getting into that exposition that you've probably heard about in reading class. Exposition is the background. That could be the background of the characters, like the protagonist, or the setting, which is the time period and the place. It could even be about a critical object. Like if you think about the book or the movie trilogy, The Lord of the Rings, like the whole point of the story is about a ring. So near the beginning, we need to understand that this ring is very important. Then we're moving into suspense. As we're introducing this background, as we're introducing these characters, we're starting to build suspense. That's that anticipation moment. Think about if you were describing riding a roller coaster for the first time. It's that first big climb of the roller coaster. It's that music that's slowly building before the jump scare in a horror movie. It's the description of the character's nerves before they ask the pretty girl out on a date, or before they jump off the high dive in the story. Okay, it's that tension that keeps us wanting to keep reading. In reading class, you might be calling that the rising action, and it's the beginning of that conflict or that story problem. The main event, I want you to notice, the main event is a huge chunk of this. That's the majority of our story. This is where everything has been leading up to. It contains the majority of the conflict, that story problem, whether that conflict is internal, am I brave enough to jump off this diving board, or it's external. Like in a story where a character is battling another character. It usually demonstrates that struggle, and it makes us feel, as the reader, a good author is going to make the reader feel that struggle along with the character. It The main event is also where the climax or the turning point of the story happens. And it even begins that falling action. When we think about plot, a story goes nowhere without some sort of conflict, some sort of struggle. And so that's, of course, going to be the biggest part of our narrative. The extended ending, it may or may not exist in a narrative piece. Just my own personal opinion, I happen to think it's a very important, but it may be explicitly or like word for word shown to you. You can point to it in the story with your finger, or it may be implicit, meaning you kind of have to figure it out on your own. No one's going to tell you what the character learned. No one's going to tell you what you should take away. But it's that growth moment of the character. It's where we realize the character has changed their thoughts, changed their feelings, maybe even changed their future actions. A lot of times in reading class, we call that the theme. It's the lesson that the character and the reader are supposed to take back and apply to their own lives. Okay? So when we think about narrative writing in this diamond, I don't want you to freak out. I've mentioned a lot of words that in reading we talk about. So if you turn that diamond on its side, you'll notice it's just a plot triangle. Like all we've done is we've turned it so we can sort of flesh out and see the largeness of that main event. That's really why we do it that way. And so when we're talking about this, we're talking about that exposition. We're talking about the rising action, the climax, the falling action, and the resolution. If you look, it follows that same pattern that we talk about in reading lessons. The second type of graphic organizer and genre that we're going to be learning about this year is informational or expository writing. The purpose is to inform the audience. Some characteristics, it's typically made up of main ideas and supporting details, contains mostly facts, and it's structured in blocks of connected information. Informational writing is things like textbooks, directions, cookbooks, newspaper articles, where you're learning about things in chunks of information. One of the ways that we use to organize that information is through the informational pillar. And this is just a graphic organizer to kind of help you understand the structure of it, where we have the introduction first, the introductory paragraph. It contains the background, whether it starts off with a question, statistics, expert quotation, but it also has a topic sentence where it's telling you this is what we're going to learn about. The middle portion, I want you to notice, is the biggest portion, even though it's got these small little chunks. But it's just the repeated organization of it. So those main ideas are chunked by paragraphs, including supporting details that might give examples or further explanation. Depending on the length of the informational piece, it could be that you have one main idea and supporting details, or you could have 5 main ideas and supporting details. It just depends on how much you're trying to inform, how much information you're trying to pass to the reader. The conclusion paragraph restates the lead or topic sentence, that thing that you're telling them about, and brings the information to a close. I want you to notice the informational pillar is very straightforward. It actually just moves straight down the line, okay? It goes straight down the line from here's what I'm going to tell you about, this is me telling you about it, to let me remind you what I told you about. In argument and opinion writing, you're going to see there are some very close similarities. But the purpose, instead of just to inform, now our purpose is to persuade. And we want to make sure that we're persuading using reasons and evidence. That evidence is so important in argument or opinion writing. Argument or opinion writing has opinions that can be supported by facts and statistics. It also is structured in blocks of connected reasoning. Now here I want you to notice we're not talking about just information, but reasoning, beliefs, why the reader should agree with you. If you look, the argument pillar looks super, super, super similar to the informational pillar. But now in the introduction, instead of just like a statement of what we're going to learn about, this is a claim that you're trying to prove. So I think about the argument pillar like a trial. Think about like a court show that you've seen on TV, or a movie where someone's gone to court and had to be in a trial. This is that opening statement that the lawyer makes about why my client is innocent or guilty, or why my client is innocent, or why the defendant is guilty. And then this middle part, the reasons and the evidence, that if you're thinking about a trial, that's where you're presenting that evidence of why the person is guilty or not guilty. You're trying to get the jury, the audience, to agree with you. But you can't get them to agree with you unless you have evidence like facts, statistics, expert testimony, personal examples. Okay? That concluding paragraph, that is where you're bringing it home. It's the closing statement of a trial, if we're keeping that trial metaphor. And it's where the author is going to usually provide a call to action to the reader. Agree with me. Do this. Change your mind. Okay? And so, just like the informational pillar, everything is supported by something else. So every reason is supported by evidence. So reason number 1 is supported by evidence. Reason number 2 is supported by evidence. Reason number 3 is supported by evidence. Just like with the informational pillar, it depends on what exactly you're trying to get them to prove, what you're trying to get them to believe. You might have to have one reason. You might have to have 10 reasons. It just depends on how big of a topic you're trying to attack. As we close this lesson, I want you to think about a couple of things. What are the similarities between that informational pillar and argument pillar? What are the differences? And then also, how are those two different than the narrative? Okay, so all of these graphic organizers have been given to you to download and put into your Google Drive folder. Keep up with them, because as we continue online, or even as we go back in person, you're going to need to use these as references. If you have any questions, please make sure to reach out to me so that I can clarify further.